Welcome back to another video, and what I'm talking about today are the 6 reasons I would buy a 6K Blackmagic pocket cinema camera over a Sony FX30. So I've had my Blackmagic for a while, my 6K Blackmagic. I've had this Sony for about 6 months, and I've been using both of these cameras extensively. Now, I was a little on the fence about buying the Sony because I simply love the Blackmagic ecosystem and everything that they make with it. And I had a chance, I was doing this job a while back, and I had a chance to use a Sony a7 IV. And it was good. It was better for photography than it was for video. But with that being said, when they came out with the FX30, I thought, well, it would be nice to have something that does have a autofocus on it, even though I really don't use it that much. But it would still be nice to have something that has an autofocus, and maybe I'd like the smaller form factor for my gimbals and stuff. Well, after using it for a while, I've come up with these 6 reasons, these 6 definitive reasons why I would rather have a Blackmagic than a Sony FX30. Now, before we get started, let's compare apples to apples. I've got a 6K, and the price is about the same. The 6K is a little more expensive than the Sony, but with that out of the way, and then we're talking a couple $100, if that. With that out of the way, the 6K does have a 6K sensor in it, obviously, and I shoot primarily 4K or 6K B-RAW. But when I'm shooting 4K, I am using the 6K sensor. So I'm getting that little bit of extra resolution. And to make sure that everything is fair, apples to apples, the Sony FX30, even though it does shoot in 4K, it does upsample to 6K to get that little bit more of resolution out of it. And with all that being said, the images on both of these are, well, they're stunning images. But there are vast differences between the two cameras. So let's get started. At number 1, the screen size. This, I guess, is my big beef with it. When you're buying a camera with a small form factor like a Sony FX30, when you're using it outside, that little 3-inch screen is just too small. So at this point, I have to put my my external monitor onto the FX30. And adding that external monitor, I no longer have that small form factor, which is one of the reasons that I thought I would really, really like the FX30. But the 3-inch screen is just too small. Well, when you get the Blackmagic, you get a 5-inch screen on the back. And when I'm outside, I no longer have to use my external monitor. The screen is just massive on the back of it. And with that, having all that real estate, it's so much easier to get through the menus. Everything's easier to touch. You don't have to be so finite where you push, and you don't have the constant endless scrolling like you do on the Sony. So my number 1 reason for getting with a Blackmagic over an FX30 is the screen size. My second reason, number 2, is the form factor. Now, the Sony FX30 is a small camera. You can see in the photo here of my 2 cameras sitting side by side. And I'm actually shooting this on my 6K. I just got through shooting a video for my music channel, where I have a guitar channel, music channel. I just got through shooting that in the other room on my Sony FX30. But when I'm doing stuff for clients, if I'm ever doing anything handheld, the 6K, everything about the form factor of the 6K is better. It's bigger, it's beefier, it feels more solid in your hands. The smaller the camera, when you're doing handheld, then you can get the little micro jitters from not being able to stabilize it all that great when you are doing handheld. Now, I do like the FX30 on my gimbal a little better because it's lighter, it's smaller. My 6K can get heavy, especially with the big glass on it. And after a while, it kind of taxes your back and your arms. So the FX30 does have, I will give it the nod on that. But for handheld, I would much rather use my 6K. Well, it does have the image stabilization inside of the Sony, and it works okay. I'm sorry, it is not great. It is so not great that I'm almost to the point where I really don't use it because both cameras have the gyro ability to smooth things out in post. Now, granted, you are going to get a crop. But I do turn the, there's 2 levels of the image stabilization in the Sony, and I got to be honest, right off the top of my head, I can't tell you the names of them. And the first one is what I turn on. When you go into the second one, where you get the super stabilization, then you get a crop on top of the S35, which is just a little more crop than I actually want in it. Now, when you are doing the gyro stabilization at the end, when you're doing it in post, you will also get a crop. So the key here, obviously, is to get really good footage to where you don't have to do that. So when I'm doing handheld, even though I have the stabilization on the FX30, I still get equally as good shots, and it just feels a little more solid in my hands because of the size of the form factor of my Blackmagic 6K. My number 3 reason for getting the Blackmagic is the CODECS. This is kind of a no-brainer for me. Now, when I bought the FX30, like I said, I had a very specific need for that specific camera, which is why I bought it. And I had a very hard time not buying another Blackmagic. But with the autofocus, sometimes it's just easier what I'm doing just to hold the camera up and let it autofocus, because Sony does have an extremely good autofocus. To where Blackmagic simply doesn't have one. It does have focus assist, but it doesn't have autofocus. But the realization of it is, if you're doing professional work, you're not using autofocus anyway. And if you are, then you're making a huge mistake. 98% of everything I shoot is shot manually, which is how it should be. You can shoot in 3 different codecs. You have the SI, which is the most uncompressed. Then you can shoot in H.264 or 265. Well, the problem with that is H.264 will start to bottleneck your PC if you do not have a beast. H.265 will absolutely bottleneck your PC, and you got to start using proxies. Now, you can shoot in SI, but the problem with SI is the files are massive. But here's the other issue I have with this. Now, I'm not going to put footage up because there's a ton of footage on YouTube already. You can find this everywhere, and I'm going to try to keep this video as short as I can. But looking at the video side by side, shooting in all 3 codecs, it's nominal, the difference. Absolutely nominal. So I really don't see a reason to shoot in SI. It does make your computer flow a little better, but the file sizes are massive. And so you're better off just shooting in H.264, or if you got the PC, shooting in H.265 and saving the data. My number 4 reason for getting the Blackmagic, and this is a big one for me. The Sony does not have false color. That one just racks my brain. If they're going to take this camera and put it in their cinema line, then guess what? Part of having a cinema camera is having false color. If you've never used false color, you do not know what you're missing. What the Sony FX has is the little meter like they put on photography cameras, -1, -2, 0, +1, +2. Well, that kind of gives you an idea of your exposure, but it doesn't let you see your exposure. Not like false color does. False color, when I set this shot up in here, and you can see I've got a light here, 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 and there's one behind me. I turn on my false color and I pipe out the information to my monitor, and I can see, I turn my face pink, and I can adjust my camera, so I don't even have to mess with my lights if I don't want to. I can adjust my camera settings to get my face pink, and that's going to let me know I have the absolute proper exposure for this. But it's going to give me different colors of how the light falls everywhere else in the room, and that is absolutely an amazing, amazing tool. If you ever want to get appropriate exposure every time, you've got to have false color. The +1, +2, and all that garbage, that really doesn't tell me what I'm looking at. It tells me that I'm shooting over standard exposure or under, but it doesn't give me a visual reference of what I'm actually looking at like false color does. And to me, that is a huge fail on Sony's part. The number 5 reason I would buy a Blackmagic over the Sony, recording media. That is correct. Now, you can use your standard fare cards, the SDHC or the CFast cards in the Blackmagic, but the Blackmagic also gives you the ability to pipe your stuff out to an external SSD, which is what I'm doing right now. I don't even own a standard data card for my Blackmagic. Everything is SSDs, 1 terabyte SSDs. And I can shoot in B-RAW on these SSDs. On the Sony, first off, you don't even get RAW on the Sony, the FX30. So that is a travesty all in itself. You do get S-Log3, which I do like, because S-Log3 is actually very easy to grade, especially if you're using DaVinci Resolve. It's extremely easy to grade. So I do like that, but you still don't get raw. But the issue I have here are the data cards. 120 byte data card, SDHC, that is fast enough to shoot almost all the codecs on the Sony is about $160, $170 for 128 gigabytes. If you move over to the Sony cards, the dedicated Sony CFast cards, you're looking at probably $300 to $350 for the same card. When I can buy 1 terabyte SSDs for about $100 made by Samsung, which everybody who has a Blackmagic uses T5s and T7s, virtually everybody. And you can get them for $100, $120 for 1 terabytes all day long. So usually when I'm shooting with my Blackmagic, I usually have 3 to 5 terabytes of SSD space with me, especially if I'm going to shoot in RAW. On Sony, you can literally spend as much on data devices, on data cards. You can spend the same amount of money on that as you paid for the camera. To have enough space to store, let's say you're shooting a short, and I'm going to go out and shoot for an entire day. And if I'm going to shoot on my Blackmagic, I'm going to shoot in B-RAW. I'm going to make sure I have at least 5 terabytes of data with me. And the nice thing about it is I can also edit directly from these drives. I don't have to offload anything. If I'm going to do the same with the Sony and I need 5 terabytes and I'm looking at 256 data card from Sony for $350 to $400, all right, at 4 of those, I'm at $1,000 and I'm a little over a terabyte. Sony should have given us the ability, it does have the USB port on the side. They should have given us the ability to pipe the video out directly from there and stick it straight to an SSD. If we're going to spend all this money on cameras, at least give us the ability to find an economical way to record our footage. And I got to be honest, SSD is the way to go. For the price point, for what you get, it's just hard to beat. And that is another huge fail from Sony. My number 6 reason for buying a Blackmagic over a Sony is simply the menus. If you've never used a Blackmagic camera, the menus are absolutely brilliant. They're very well thought out and they're very logical. They're easy to get to. They're easy to manipulate because of the 5-inch screen. And everything is laid out exactly how it should be. You have a row across the top. If you need to check out your audio, you hit the audio button and your audio controls open up. If you want to check your monitor out, you hit your monitor button and all your monitor controls open up. Now, Sony did give us the little menu, the little sub menu. That does make it a little better because it has the features that you would probably need most right in that menu. But the problem is, again, it's a little 3-inch screen and you got little bitty pinpoints that you have to hit on it. But if you need to deep dive on the Blackmagic, it is crazy easy. Because like I said, you go to audio and every single audio control you could ever have is right there. And if it's not on that page, you page over and it's on that page. And it's on a big, bright screen for you to get to. On the Sony, if you've ever used a Sony camera, you know how shockingly bad their menu system is. You can scroll and search and scroll and search forever to get to anything on a Sony. And I thought Canon had a terrible menu system. No. Sony is much worse. Sony literally has the worst menu system I've ever used on a camera. The Blackmagic, well, it's almost brainless. You don't even need a manual to figure it out. If you know anything about cameras, you can completely navigate the Blackmagic straight out of the box. So those are my 6 reasons why I would buy a Blackmagic over a Sony FX30. But with that being said, I am going to say, you're looking at about $1,750 for the Sony. You're looking at about, it's $1995 for the Blackmagic 6K. With that being said, both these cameras do shoot extremely well. They shoot fantastic. Both of them, the images are fantastic. Now, granted, I can get better images out of the Blackmagic because I have the ability to shoot in 6K RAW, which is phenomenal if you've never shot in it. It is just, some of the best footage you're ever going to get. But even though I have all these points of why I would rather have a Blackmagic, the Sony is still a very good and very capable camera. Now, if you're somebody who needs autofocus all the time, obviously the Sony is the way to go. If you're somebody who wants an extremely small form factor, obviously the Sony is the better way to go. But if you're somebody that's doing professional work for money, and you have demanding clients, you simply can't beat the Blackmagic 6K.